Hi. Let's talk about Wuthering Heights. The first time that I read Wuthering Heights, I was blown away by it. I think I was 16 probably. And mostly, I think, because I had first watched the old black and white movie starring Meryl Oberon and Laurence Olivier.
Ellen, I am beautiful.
If you haven't seen that version, it's wonderful. It's also inaccurate. And when I read the book, it was so brutal. It was so brutal, but also so beautiful. And like so many others before me, reading that book brought about an obsession with knowing about Emily Bronte, who was, of course, the most elusive of the Bronte sisters, leaving behind the daintiest trail. Dainty meaning small, not that she was dainty. If I'd been on my game, this would be my Emily Bronte No Coward Soul Is Mine mug that I got at the Bronte Parsonage Museum many a year ago, but I wasn't, so hot dog mom will have to do. Let's talk about Wuthering Heights. My name is Jenna. You have stumbled upon, perhaps because you are also interested in Wuthering Heights, or perhaps because you are adamantly opposed to the title of this video, which I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to have the word love in it, because I do think that this book is one of the greatest love stories of all time. Now, I will also say it is not a love story that you want to emulate. I'm not saying this is a romance, although it is a romance in the classic sense of the word. I am not saying that this is a lovey-dovey story, although I will argue that Heathcliff can make your heart flutter. But this is a romance. This is a love story. This is one of the greatest loves ever told. Emily Bronte got it right. Emily Bronte got it right. And no, I'm not going to go into hours of discussing how a young woman from a parsonage on a moor, growing up with sisters and a bit of an aversion to people and interactions, could write such a romance. A woman who, we assume, never had such a romance of her own, because that is ridiculous. To assume that a woman cannot imagine a love that is wild and passionate and elemental is to misunderstand what a woman is. So we're going to talk about this and a million different things, but I'm turning on my computer now because the first thing I want to look at is what are some reviews that came out in Emily Bronte's time. So contemporary reviews, not contemporary to us, contemporary to them. Now, I got weird light here. Let's see if I can still read this. I'll just have weird light for a little bit. It's mood lighting. So here we go. What did people say? What were the responses? What were the reactions? So in 1847, an unknown reviewer on December 18th, which is one day and 1 year before Emily's death date. So on December 18th, 1847, she would die on December 19th, 1848. But, and I always remember Emily's death date because my birthday is December 17th and her death date is December 18th, and one does not pass without my thinking of the other. So when I saw that date, it just popped out at me. So an attempt to give novelty and interest to fiction by resorting to those singular, quote unquote, characters that used to exist everywhere, but especially in retired and remote places. The success is not equal to the ability of the writer, chiefly because the incidents are too coarse and disagreeable to be attractive, the very best being improbable with a moral taint about them, and the villainy not leading to results sufficient to justify the elaborate pains taken in depicting it. The execution, however, is good. Grant the writer all that is requisite as regards matter, and the delineation is forcible and truthful. So they're a good writer, but, and remember, let's back up for a minute. When Wuthering Heights was first published, it was published under a pseudonym. Ellis Bell was listed as the author, and Currer, Ellis, and Acton Bell, Charlotte, Emily, and Anne Bronte, had already released a collection of poems that they paid for out of their own pocket that did not sell well. Anne's book also was published at the same time. So Ellis and Acton Bell were published with the same publisher at the same time. So people kind of knew that there was some Bell stuff going on. And shortly after this, even though Charlotte's first attempt at publication with her two sisters was The Professor, and it did not fly, nobody wanted it, she quickly produced Jane Eyre, which is pretty much The Professor, but from a different perspective, and we all know what happens with Jane Eyre, the success that it gets. People really loved Jane Eyre. They really, really kind of ignored Agnes Grey, and they detested, for the most part, or were shocked and appalled. Their Victorian sensibilities were injured by Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. So you may hear references to Ellis or to just the author, because we, at the time of writing this review, don't know who the author is. We suspect it's not who they say they are, but we don't assume that it's a woman. And we don't assume it's a single woman. We don't assume it's a young woman, and we don't assume that she is the daughter of a curate. So here we go. This reviewer in The Spectator said that the author shows excellent writing skills, meritorious author. However, they go to too great a pain, they go to too much trouble to present to you terrible, terrible deeds that have no moral virtue, and then do not give you a proper payoff. Now, in Victorian times, a proper payoff would not be the kind of ending that we get here, obviously. It would be a redemption arc. I argue there is a very serious redemption arc in Wuthering Heights, but it is not a Victorian redemption arc. Nobody has a come to Jesus moment except for the man who's already come to Jesus. So we have a problem from Victorian sensibility. In fact, all their actions are justified. All of the evil deeds are justified in the end of Wuthering Heights. Oh, yes, they are. So we scooch on. That would be a problem. On December 25th, 1847, Mr. Chorley at the Athenaeum said that in spite of much power and cleverness, in spite of its true to life in the remote nooks and corners of England, Wuthering Heights is a disagreeable story. So we keep hearing this idea that a long time ago, or out in the middle of nowhere, in those far, far corners of our country, people live this way, people behave this way. It's not the way that we in the cities behave. Wild, it's elemental, it's bestial, it belongs out there in the wild. There is a remove. It's either a time remove, it happened back then, or it's a space remove. Well, they may act like that, but we don't act like that. We know better now, right? So they agree, tacitly, they agree that this story is not as out there as it might seem. It's just out there, not out there, out there. So, the Bells seem to affect painful and exceptional subjects, the misdeeds and oppressions of tyranny, the eccentricities of quote-unquote woman's fantasy. They do not turn away from dwelling upon those physical acts of cruelty which we know to have their warrant in real annals of crime and suffering. So they write about things that could happen, but why would we want to read about them? The brutal master of the lonely house on Wuthering Heights, a prison which might be pictured from life, has doubtless had his prototype in those ungenial and remote districts where human beings, like the trees, grow gnarled and dwarfed and distorted by inclement weather. So, when the wind blows, when the heights weather, you're going to get some crooked growth. Heathcliff grows crooked. Kathy grows crooked because of their environment. He's not wrong. He's not wrong. But he might have been indicated with far fewer touches in place of so entirely filling the canvas that there is hardly a scene untainted by his presence. So there's too much Heathcliff in this book about Heathcliff. Too much Heathcliff. I won't read that one. It's just comparing it to Jane Eyre. This one is really long. Let's see. Okay, so in 1847, in an unknown publication by an unknown author, sounds sketch to me, but it's positive, so I'm going to read it. It's really long, but at some point it starts to say, "It is not every day that so good a novel makes its appearance, and to give its contents in detail would be depriving many a reader of half the delight he would experience from the perusal of the work itself. To its pages we must refer him then. There will he have the ample opportunity of sympathizing, if he has one touch of nature that makes the whole world kin with the feelings of childhood, youth, manhood, and age, and all the emotions and passions which agitate the restless bosom of humanity. May he derive from it the delight we have ourselves experienced, and be equally grateful to the author for the genuine pleasure he has afforded him." One wonders if he read Wuthering Heights before writing that review. I love it, but I don't know if you could say that many, happy, delightful things. Oh, this one, I love this one. The Examiner of January 8th, 1848, anonymous, states, "This is a strange book." Let's see. "A strange and inartistic story from the Atlas on January 22nd, 1848. The book sadly wants relief. A few glimpses of sunshine would have increased the reality of the picture. Wuthering Heights by Ellis Bell is a terrific story associated with an equally fearful and repulsive spot." A spot, you say? An Edgar Allan Poe telltale heart spot? A Lady Macbeth spot? A spot, you say? It didn't go away, did it? Wuthering Heights didn't go away. As much as people say they hate it, as much as people say it is hard to swallow, as much as people criticize it, it never went away. Why is that? As much as people say it's unrelatable, as much as people say there's nothing in it of a moral value, it never went away. And one needs to ask themselves why. And that's what I'm here to do today. So, before I begin, let me say there will be spoilers. So many spoilers. So many spoilers. Please do not watch this video if you do not want Wuthering Heights spoiled for you. And I do suggest that if you have never read the book, if you have never watched a movie, if you have never heard the story, if you only have heard little bits and pieces of other people talking about it, that before you watch this video, before you watch any video, you go and you read this book. It's, dare I say, a bit of a perspective-altering experience. So there will be spoilers. There just will. Some of my favorite books that I have read over the years in learning about the Brontes, and I have read so many. I don't even know how many. I started reading about the Brontes when I was 16, and I read multiple books a year, even to this day, about the Brontes. So over the years, I have come across quite a few, and I really love several biographies about their life, but my favorite is Juliet Barker's collection of their letters and the way that she has edited them so that their placement really tells you the story of their family. There are letters here from all members of the family throughout all of the lifespans until after Charlotte's death. Patrick, their father, and Arthur Bell Nichols, Charlotte's husband, live for quite some time after, and that is included in here as well. This isn't the story of Charlotte, like so many books about the Brontes actually is. This is the story of the Bronte family in their own words across their times. And this is an excellent resource and highly readable, highly readable. Remember, they are all writers, so their letters, their correspondence are really well done, Really well done. They are not narrative in the sense that their writing is narrative, but they are glimpses into a reality that we can only try to recreate, but never as successfully as they can tell us themselves. The next one that I really love and would highly recommend is The Bronte Myth by Lucasta Miller. This addresses all of those things that kind of draw you in when you first learn about the Brontes, especially Emily Bronte, I think. All of the mysteries, all of the little things like, ooh, was she a witch? Ooh, was she a lesbian? Ooh, was she this? Was she that? Was she autistic? Was she this? There are so many things that so many people would like to see in a woman who showed us and left us very little. Very little. And we make so many stories out of tiny scraps. And this just addresses all of those myths and asks you not to let go of the dear little story that you tell yourself about who they are and how they relate to you, but to see them as clearly and simply as they presented themselves. These are not simple women, but what they leave behind is fairly simple and straightforward. It's fairly straightforward. And this just challenges you to accept what is there and see what is there to know about them without the story, without the myth. Because there is so much myth around this family. Understandably so. And if you don't know anything about the Brontes and you're like, what is she talking about? I highly suggest you pick up a biography, any biography, and you'll be hooked. They are, as much as I love their novels, they are much more interesting subject matter than the stories that they wrote. Have a read. The next one that I really love is Deborah Lutz's The Bronte Cabinet, 3 Lives in 9 Objects. So this takes artifacts from the Bronte Parsonage Museum, things that belonged to the Bronte family, and it builds history around it. There's a book like this about Jane Austen as well by a different author, and it is also my favorite biography of Jane Austen, where it just goes and looks at the historical and the life context of an object in relation to the person you're reading about, in this case, the Bronte family. Emily Bronte by Stevie Davies. This is from the Writers and Their Works series, and this is literary analysis. This is literary criticism about Wuthering Heights, the Gondel world, the Glasstown world, Emily's juvenilia, her poetry, her Belgian essays, which I also have copies of, which are fascinating to read, especially as a teacher. They are fascinating to read. And so it just goes into everything that they have published, that we have seen, that has been published. Her little birthday things that she wrote, her and Anne, and exchanged every year, a few years in a row. Yeah, just anything that Emily wrote is here. And it's very short, but this is a very interesting take on a lot of what she wrote. And it's the only place that I know of that you can read about everything that she wrote in one place, so that you kind of have it all juxtaposed together, and it starts to make a lot of cohesive sense to you. A classic. This is, I think, the only actual biography of Emily Bronte. It's quite old, and some of the information is definitely outdated, and it definitely buys into some of those myth ideas that Lucasta Miller addresses in the Bronte myth, but it's still a really interesting way to get to flesh out a ghost, really. So I enjoy this one, but read it with a grain of salt. And then this is a fairly new one. This is Walking the Invisible, Following in the Bronte's Footsteps by Michael Stewart. This is such an insightful little book. So while it is mainly a tour guide, I mean, there are maps here, there are walks here, there are routes here, there is also a bit of memoir, Michael Stewart, all related directly to his work with the Brontes, the Bronte memory, the Bronte terrain. the Bronte literature, but there's also literary criticism in here. Literary criticism that is a little bit mind-blowing, really. There are things that I've never really seen pointed out before that he points out, and maybe they have been pointed out in other places and I've just read over it, but he presented some things in a way that really caught my attention that had never caught my attention before, and I will be sharing a little bit about Wuthering Heights from this book. So there's a few things that I want to get out of the way before we talk about love. One is the presence of the number 7.
11, 12.
7 within Wuthering Heights. It could just be, of course, that the number 7 is a nice little round number. No, not a round number. It could, of course, just be a nice number to fall on that is, Emily uses it a significant amount. I believe it is mentioned 28 times. Mainly in 2 sections of the book. One, a dream, and one, a death scene. However, Emily was no fool. Although her education was incredibly non-traditional, she read widely. They all did. And myth would have definitely been something that she was familiar with. And the number 7 is associated in mythology with Athena or Minerva, depending on whether you're reading Roman or Greek myth. Same goddess, different names. And these are the goddesses of war, and these are the goddesses of protection of the city. Additionally, she would have very much been aware of the use of the number 7 in the Bible. Forgiveness, it's associated with forgiveness. You forgive 70 times 7, which is an infinite, it's meant to represent an infinite amount of times. You don't stop forgiving, which indicates that there will never be a moment when you are not required to forgive. People will not stop giving you reasons to need to practice forgiveness. There will continuously be harm and pain, and your continuous response is forgiveness. It's also, in Revelation, the 7-fold Holy Spirit. It's a reference to the Holy Spirit, the presence of completion, the presence of wholeness. So, the number 7, forgiveness, protection and war, completion and wholeness. One wonders if Emily was just falling on a plausible number, or if she had a message for us embedded within this story. So there's the number 7. And when I mention the number 7, I'm not going to stop every time and just kind of go into it. But I do want you to think about war, protection, from a female goddess. War, protection, forgiveness in the face of constant injury, and wholeness, completion, the presence of a spirit, the Holy Spirit, but a spirit. The other thing I want you to think about and keep in mind that we need to acknowledge about Wuthering Heights is the absence of viable mothers, the inability to create a mother-child bond that is sustainable and that sustains. There are attempts, there are obviously mothers because there are babies, but that nurturing relationship doesn't ever not get cut off. And so remember that whole bit about the environment causing Heathcliff to grow crooked and Kathy to grow crooked. It's a gust, this lack of mothering. It's a gust of constant, perpetual wind, causing everyone in its wake to grow crooked, to be a little bit off, to be a little less Victorian than they should be. even those at Thrush Grange who grow up with a mother have a kind of removed mother. We don't learn much about the mother in that situation, and we do see that the kids grow up quite spoiled, quite clingy and greedy and haughty and soft. And it's that so many people latch onto in these reviews at the beginning of this book's existence on the public market, is that idea that their environment has made them strange. If they'd grown up somewhere else, they wouldn't be so strange. So we have an absence of mothers, which is significant. We have a presence of a number 7, which I believe is significant. We have love. We have so many forms and expressions of love. All of them imperfect. All of them too powerful and not powerful enough at the same time. This is not a sentimental story. Thus, it was not a Victorian story, although it is written in the Victorian period. The love in this book is not sentimental, and we still, to this day, want a little bit of sentimentality in our romance. But this book, in an extreme archetypal way, presents to you the fact that love and pain are synonymous. And I'm not speaking from a pessimistic point of view. If you love something, that means you'll lose them, and that will be pain. We lose everything. We take nothing with us from this life. And so immediately upon becoming vulnerable in a loving situation with someone or something, you run the risk of pain. I know there are people who are already turning me off or already arguing with television, and that's okay. I'm sorry I triggered you. It's the truth. But Emily Bronte is trying to present for you in the way that she knows how, because mostly she has written Gothic fiction. She's attracted to the dark side of things. She wants to express the duality of things. And I think people, the root of the aversion to calling this a love story, the root of the desire to focus on revenge or siblings and erase love, is our own inner discomfort with duality. It's Ellen Nussey's discomfort with duality. It's the Victorian discomfort with passion and expression and duality. They know it's there, but we don't talk about it. And we kind of do the same thing. We either embrace one or the other, but can't find the balance between the two. And I don't say that this book succeeds in balance, but it does succeed in showing you the pull of yin and yang, the presence of good within evil and evil within good, and the fact that good and evil are defined by perspective alone. Some of you are very upset with me by that, but it's true. There is no good or bad, but thinking make it so. Thank you, Shakespeare. So here we go. There will be spoilers. We're not going to talk about every character. We could talk about every character in relation to love, but we're not going to talk about every character in relation to love. We're going to focus mainly on Heathcliff and Cathy. Now, Heathcliff is a boy who gets brought home. At the start of the book, you have a very mundane character. He's a bit of a mess. He has his own love issues. He's rented a house on the moors. He's retreated away from the sea where he's kind of been vacationing. And he's rented a house on the moors. He's rented Thrush Cross Grange. And he knows that the owner of it lives in the neighboring home of Wuthering Heights. And he wants to go and meet the landowner, the person who he's paying his rent to, because he wants to. And also, like, he wants to know the person. And also, it's his only neighbor. And so he shows up at Wuthering Heights and gets kind of a rude awakening about his only neighbor and the lifestyle that they live. He meets Heathcliff, and the infamous story, we'll get to it, where he ends up eventually having to spend the night in Wuthering Heights in Cathy's box bed from childhood, and being brought face to face with the ghost of Cathy Earnshaw Linton, and how the story unfolds from there. We'll get to that. We'll get to that spirit who appears after he has a dream about so many sevens. But we'll get there. For now, let's start with who this landowner is. It's Heathcliff. The landowner is Heathcliff. Heathcliff, when he first arrives on the scene, arrives as an unknown character. He comes into a family. Mr. Earnshaw takes a walk to Liverpool and brings him back. Now, there's some interesting things about this. Who is Heathcliff? Where does he come from? Why does Mr. Earnshaw bring him home? There's a lot of, and I think part of the sustainability of the story is the inclusion of mysteries that are completely unsolvable for the most part. I am going to read you a little bit from Walking the Invisible. This is from chapter 5, Mr. Earnshaw's Walk to Liverpool. So the author of it, Michael Stewart, says, "When I came across John Sutherland's essay, Is Heathcliff a Murderer?, in the University Library in 1995, I was struck by the opening sentence. Quote, when he returns to Wuthering Heights after his mysterious 3-year period of exile, Heathcliff has become someone very cruel. He has left an uncouth but essentially humane, stable lad, but he returns a gentleman psychopath." Unquote. Psychopath didn't quite cut it. Heathcliff does not suffer from an absence of feeling, but a surfeit. So he has too much feeling. I started to really think about what had happened to him during those years, and I also started to think more about where Heathcliff was from. Why Mr. Earnshaw had traveled all the way to Liverpool and back in one trip. Why he had named the boy he brought back after his dead son. I became fascinated by the possibilities. Mr. Earnshaw was a farmer. Why would he travel to Liverpool in the middle of a summer when his workload would have been at its most intense? Why wouldn't he take one of the horses from the stable? What would draw him to Liverpool? He couldn't be on business. Liverpool wasn't a market town. Why else would he avoid the established coach that went from Yorkshire to Liverpool unless he was traveling covertly? I started to think more about Liverpool and what it was most known for in 1771. At that time, it was the biggest slave port in Europe. In the book, Mr. Earnshaw walks from Wuthering Heights to Liverpool and back in 3 days. We are told it is a 60-mile journey each way. My own calculations make it more like 140 miles in total. So he takes the path, and it takes him a long time, and is very roundabout. And he tells us about things that the character might have seen. In 1771, Liverpool was a bustling port, including 105 fleets engaged in the African slave trade. These ships went to the west coast of Africa to pick up their human cargo before transporting them to the West Indies to work mainly on sugar plantations. Many died on this middle passage, and the dead bodies were thrown overboard. In fact, it was legal to throw the living overboard as well, and those showing visible signs of illness or pregnancy were sometimes dispatched in this way. Let's give it a name. Murder. Those who lived were confined in tiny boxes like sardines in a tin. The passage took weeks, and during this time they would be sitting in their own waste. The stench must have been overpowering. It was big business. At that time, 80% of England's wealth was a result of the slave trade. 11 million Africans were transported into slavery, and 1.4 million died on the voyage. Between 1763 and 1776, Liverpool was Britain's main slave trading port. Twice as many vessels engaged in the slavery business here than they did in Bristol. By the end of the century, Liverpool merchants were responsible for 84% of the total British transatlantic slave trade. The many slaves who were brought to Liverpool were bought and sold openly on the streets and in the town square. I think about this when I arrive at Liverpool docks. It is now a place to drink and eat and shop. You can also visit the Tate Gallery. The main dock, the Royal Albert, would not have been built in 1771, but there were several large docks back then. King's Dock, Salthouse Dock, and George's Dock. There were goods sheds, tobacco warehouses, spirit vaults, breweries, inns, and taverns. The air would have been rich and sharp with strong aromas, the stench of things baking, boiling, and burning, mashing, malting, and milling, sweet yeast and bitter hop. There is no trace now of the poorhouse or the house of correction. There are no cooperages, block and spat makers' shops, or boat-building yards. I see a young family sitting outside a cocktail bar with a designer pram. The mother drinks a glass of Prosecco with a strawberry garnish. The father fiddles with a bottle of fruit cider. I, on the other hand, am here to access the public records of Liverpool Central Library and also the slavery archives of the Maritime Museum just around the corner. The shrieking gulls above connect then with now as I make my way to the museum entrance. I think again about Mr. Earnshaw. In my mind, there can only be one reason why he made this journey as I have just done on foot. He came here for a slave. So, Mr. Earnshaw brings home a slave, and Kathy feels a kinship. They immediately feel a kinship. They grow up together. And when Mr. Earnshaw dies, his son, Hindley, tries to take his rightful place and to try and keep Heathcliff in his place. But Heathcliff will rise above his place. In fact, the boy meant to be a slave will own it all. He'll own it all. He'll even get the girl in the end. The afterlife end. Let's look at a little bit of love. When Mr. Lockwood, our guest, screams because a ghost grabs his hand in the middle of the night through a broken window, asking to be let in, Heathcliff comes running into the room, saying, "Come in, come in. Kathy, do come. Oh, do, once more. Oh, my heart's darling. Hear me this time, Catherine. At last, my heart's darling." He has to have a heart. We'll talk more about hearts. My heart's darling. He has to have a heart. As they grow up and get into trouble and stuff, and fall in love and stuff, without calling it love and stuff, they sneak to the neighbors to look in to see what the other half lives like. This is Thrushcross Grange. There are siblings that live there, a brother and a sister. Heathcliff and Kathy get up to a lot of trouble, but they have each other's backs. They love each other. Heathcliff says that Heathcliff, I'll read the actual quote at some point, but Heathcliff says he would never take anything from Kathy that Kathy wanted. They peek through the window, these two kids, to see what these other two kids are doing. And it says, "That was their pleasure, to quarrel. Who should not hold a heap of warm hair, and each begin to cry, because both, after struggling to get it, refused to take it." So, they peek through the window, and they see this boy and this girl. They're like counterparts. They're opposites. They're yin and yang, right? They see these two kids literally pulling on the puppy that they have between them, fighting over who gets to keep this puppy. And when finally one wins, they don't want the puppy anymore. They just wanted the superiority. They didn't want the puppy. They just argue amongst themselves. And Heathcliff says, and what I just told you, but Heathcliff, in the retelling of this story to Ellen, who is kind of the closest thing they get to a mother figure, but she's a far cry from a mother figure, he says, "When would you catch me wishing to have what Kathy wanted? Or find us by ourselves, seeking entertainment and yelling and sobbing and rolling on the ground, divided by the whole room? I'd not exchange for 1,000 lives my condition here for Edgar Linton's at Thrushcross Grange. Not if I might have the privilege of flinging Joseph off the highest gable and painting the house front with Hindley's blood. I wouldn't exchange anything. I would never take what Kathy wants. Kathy can have everything. Kathy can have anything she wants that I can give her. Kathy can have it all. And I wouldn't change my place, even though I have no place, for the place that Edgar Linton has, for the world, because he doesn't have that relationship that I have with Kathy. I would suffer hardship. I would be made less. I would make myself smaller because I have this relationship with Kathy. Does that not give you butterflies? That should give you butterflies. Oh, but he's so cruel. Yeah, whatever. Kathy is not my favorite. I'm a big Heathcliff fan, and I have no patience for Kathy. She's so spoiled. She's so selfish. She's so impulsive and manipulative. And people love Kathy much more and see her as more of a victim of society, whatever. They're like, oh, she had to make her choices to protect herself based on social norms, etc. Well, so did Heathcliff. And Heathcliff doesn't betray Kathy, and Kathy betrays Heathcliff and herself at every turn. I am not a Kathy fan. Not a Kathy fan. I am a Heathcliff fan. Heathcliff. And I know that so many people think he's like the bad guy. Does he do some terrible things? Absolutely. Does he ever tell you he's not going to? Never. He is who he is. You know exactly who you are dealing with. You know exactly what you've got in Heathcliff. He knows himself. He presents himself honestly. He never deviates. Kathy betrays herself. Kathy betrays him. Kathy is a fool. Kathy has to stay at Thrushcross Grange because they get caught looking through the window and a bulldog bites her ankle and she can't walk home. So she just stays there to heal. And in that time, she has her first betrayal of herself. In that time, she thinks, hey, this is kind of nice to be taken care of. It's kind of nice to not have the wind of pain blowing against me all the time. It's kind of nice to have a lot of attention on me and to be special by these people who are so different from me. It's kind of nice to be the pet for once. And in that kind of nice feeling, she's gonna ruin everything. It's the beginning of the end. She comes home from that a different person. She's dressed differently, she carries herself differently, she acts differently, she speaks to people differently, she has different expectations. She has stepped into her position as a woman of the house. She has tried to elevate herself, and she tries to ignore her feelings for Heathcliff. And she tries to elevate him to where she is. And I hesitate to use the word elevate him because he has established very clearly for the reader, for Ellen, for everybody. Ellen is telling the story and this is how she remembers it. And she's not a big fan of Heathcliff. And yet she still shares with us a version of his speech, which very clearly declares his allegiance to, his love for, his respect of, his desire for, his devotion to Kathy, and his acceptance of his place in order to maintain and retain that relationship. He's clear. He's very clear on what he wants. And Kathy, given a little bit of goose down and some fire in the fireplace, comes home and is like, now I am in charge. And she is grossed out by him now. She still loves him, but she's pretending. She's betraying herself and she's betraying him. And she wants him to act like her. But he's looked through that window already. And he knows what happens when you are like that. The infighting, the pushing, the pulling, the not wanting what you get. And he will experience that a little bit in the end when he begins to play that game to try and retain the relationship with a Kathy who is so distortedly different from who she actually was. It's heartbreaking. But in this moment, he knows who he is and he knows who she is. Snow Patrol just put out a new album recently. You've probably heard me talk about it or you've seen it on my Instagram. I've been obsessed, but there's a song in there with a refrain that says, I know my name. I know your name. I'm not talking about hope. I'm not talking about fire. I'm just trying to make sense of this desire. So put your hand on my heart. Put your hand on my head. And don't tell me you can't tell them apart. And when I heard those lyrics, I immediately thought of Heathcliff and Kathy. Because she gets really stuck in listening to her head over her heart. And in thinking that logic can dictate the heart. But it can't. You honor one to betray the other. And I suppose it's up to you which one you want to betray and which one you want to honor. But I will always pick the heart. And so I will always be more of a Heathcliff fan than a Kathy fan. When she gets back, she is going to mess everything up. She tells him to wash his face. She says, if you wash your face and brush your hair, it will be all right. But you're so dirty. He responds, I shall be dirty as I please, and I like to be dirty, and I will be dirty. Catherine, who could not comprehend how her remark should have produced such an exhibit of bad temper, she's shocked. She's shocked by it. And she removes herself from his company, and he has to remove himself from her company. And he's like, I just need to be with her. So at some point he comes, he's been starving himself, he hasn't eaten, he's taken himself out of the house. Kathy is having her own little fit, but she's not going to change, not for him. And he comes in and he says, Nellie, make me decent. I'm going to be good. It makes me want to cry. He will do anything. He will do anything for Kathy. Anything. Including become the tyrant and the terrible person that he does become. He loves her. He loves her. He will lose himself to gain her. But he will not betray her. He never betrays her. Nellie tells him that she cried last night, and he says, well, I cried last night. And she says, Nellie's like, well, we'll arrange it so you have a chance to talk to her alone. She says, you will know best what to say. She tries to build him up by telling him, I'll steal time to arrange you so that Edgar Linton shall look quite a doll beside you, and that he does. You are younger, and yet I will be bound you are taller and twice as broad across the shoulders. You could knock him down in a twinkling. Don't you feel that you could? So Nellie's like, you can beat Edgar. You can win her heart. You don't have to, you already have her heart, but like, you don't have to concede to Edgar Linton just because he's clean. And he says, but Nellie, if I knocked him down 20 times, that wouldn't make him less handsome, or me more so. I wish I had light hair and fair skin and was dressed and behaved as well and had a chance of being rich as he will be. He thinks those are the things that he needs to win her heart. And honestly, those are the things he needs to win her heart, because Kathy is gross. Kathy is so awful. Those are not the things you should need to win someone's heart. Poor little insecure human boy who's in love with a woman girl at the time, has a heart of stone, really. Time goes on, and she is spending a lot of time. She's being courted by Edgar Linton. And time passes, and she's spending a lot of time with Edgar. And Heathcliff has been keeping count on the calendar. He says, "Look at the almanac on the wall." He points to a framed sheet hanging near the window and continues, "The crosses are for the evenings that you have spent with the Lintons, and the dots for those spent with me. Do you see, I've marked every day." "Yes, very foolish. As if I took notice," replied Catherine in a peevish tone. "Where's the sense in that?" "To show that I do take notice," said Heathcliff. "And should I always be sitting with you?" she demanded, growing more irritated. "What good do I get? What do you talk about? You might be dumb or a baby for anything that you say to amuse me or for anything you do." "You never told me before that I talked too little or that you disliked my company, Kathy." "It is no company at all when people know nothing and say nothing." She tears him down. She tears him down a lot. And he's saying, "I miss you. I miss you. I notice you're not here. I notice you're pulling away." And she says, "Well, you're not doing anything to keep me." Kathy. We will be coming back to this page because there's something else here that we need to see when we get a little further in. She does start to realize that she's losing him because she's been pushing him away. Edgar wants to marry her, and we get to the point where Kathy does it again. She's trying to make sense of the desire, to go back to that Snow Patrol song. She's trying to make sense of the desire that she feels for Heathcliff, who she logically knows she should not want. But it's all that she wants. And so she's at war within herself constantly, trying to choose the sensible choice, the rich choice, the clean choice, the white choice, the socially acceptable choice, not the choice she wants. Not the one who shares a soul with her. But appears to be completely opposite. Not the one who understands her, not the one who would do anything for her, not the one who would change himself for her, not the one who would be anything that she desired. She doesn't want him. She doesn't want to want him. She wants to want the easy one.
What's wrong? Edgar Linton's asked me to marry him. And have you accepted him? Yes. Was I right, Millie? Perfectly. If he loves you and you love him, where's the obstacle?
Here. In my heart and my soul, I'm convinced I'm wrong.
Why? Millie, do you ever have strange dreams? If I do, I choose not to dwell on them.
I dreamt I was in heaven once, only heaven didn't seem to be my home. I broke my heart with weeping to come back to earth, and the angels were so angry that they flung me out into the middle of the heath on top of Wuthering Heights. I woke up there sobbing for joy.
What has this to do with your marrying Edgar Linton?
This. That I have no more business to marry him than I have to be in heaven.
She doesn't want to want the one she wants. She wants to want the easy one. The one she will never have to answer questions about. In fact, if she marries Edgar Linton, people will say, why did he pick her? Because she's wild and capricious and mean. And she's trying to talk it out with Ellen. because he's asked her, Edgar has asked her to marry him, and she's trying to decide what to do because she knows she now has to make a decision. Her heart is screaming no, and her mind is screaming yes. She's had a dream about not going to heaven, about being thrust out of heaven, landing on the heath, and feeling more at home than she ever felt anywhere else, knowing that this was it, feeling relief that she wasn't in heaven, because Edgar represents heaven and Heathcliff represents home. Her subconscious tells her to pick Heathcliff. Her heart tells her to pick Heathcliff. Even Ellen says, don't marry Edgar for the reasons you're giving to marry him. And she is trying to justify it for herself. Kathy tries to justify it by saying, if I marry Edgar Linton, then I can elevate Heathcliff. But Heathcliff doesn't want to be elevated. He doesn't want to be elevated in that way. And he definitely doesn't want to be elevated by the money of the man that the woman that he loves marries instead of him. Oh, what a mess. What a mess.
Oh, how I love him. I love him not just because he's handsome, but because he's more myself than I am. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same. Linton's is as different as a moonbeam from lightning or frost from fire. I have no more business marrying Edgar Linton than I do to be in heaven. And if Hindley hadn't bought Heathcliff so low, I never should have thought of it. Heathcliff? It would degrade me to marry Heathcliff now. What was that? It were Heathcliff. You were listening. He hasn't heard me, has he? Well, no matter. Heathcliff doesn't know what it is to be in love. He knows as well as you. How will he bear to be separated from you? Who is to separate us, pray? I will not forsake Heathcliff. I will have both. You cannot have both. You have to choose. I have no choice.
She even accuses Heathcliff on page 81 of not knowing what being in love is. But I think we've established, without even giving all the evidence that is present, that Heathcliff knows exactly what being in love is. And Kathy says, I cannot express it, but surely you and everybody have a notion that there is or should be an existence of yours beyond you. What were the use of my creation if I were entirely contained here? My great mysteries in this world have been my great miseries in this world have been Heathcliff's miseries. And I watched and felt each from the beginning. My great thought in living is himself. If all else perished and he remained, I should still continue to be. And if all else remained and he were annihilated, the universe would turn to a mighty stranger. I should not seem a part of it. My love for Linton is like the foliage in the woods. Time will change it, I'm well aware, as winter changes the trees. My love for Heathcliff resembles the eternal rocks beneath, a source of little visible delight, but necessary. Nellie, I am Heathcliff.
Ellen. I am Heathcliff.
He's always in my mind. Not as a pleasure any more than I am always a pleasure to myself, but as my own being. So don't talk of our separation again. It is impracticable. And she paused and hid her face in the folds of her gown, but I jerked it forcibly away. I was out of patience with her folly. But Heathcliff didn't hear any of that. Heathcliff heard her earlier say that it would degrade her to marry him. And he runs off to disappear. And he runs off to disappear for 3 years. And in those 3 years, we don't know what he does. Probably join the military, but he comes back rich. And he comes back with manners. And he comes back ready to take over Wuthering Heights and make it his own. so that he can be close to Kathy and also get some vengeance. And he comes back ready to be and do and say anything he must be and do and say to get her. And everything, every cruel, every kind, every vengeful, every strategic action, thought, and emotion he has until the end of the novel from his return is motivated by his love for Kathy. Love doesn't behave that way. Love doesn't behave like Kathy. When he runs away, she marries Edgar Linton, and she lives 3 quiet years, and Ellen describes these as happy years. But when he returns, she's happy. And she stirs up trouble. When he first disappears, we see a bit of Kathy's ghost in the living Kathy. So, on page 25, we get this description. Our guest, who's sleeping in Kathy's bed at the Heights, has just woken up from a dream about a preacher preaching about 70 times 7. And he hears a knocking sound at the window. And he says, "I must stop it nevertheless," I muttered, knocking my knuckles through the glass and stretching an arm out to seize the importunate branch, instead of which my fingers closed on the fingers of a little ice-cold hand. The intense horror of nightmare came over me. I tried to draw back my arm, but the hand clung to it, and a most melancholy voice sobbed, "Let me in! Let me in!" "Who are you?" I asked, struggling meanwhile to disengage myself. "Catherine Linton," it replied shiveringly. Why did I think of Linton? I had read Earnshaw 20 times for Linton. "I'm come home. I'd lost my way on the moor." As it spoke, I discerned obscurely a child's face looking through the window. Terror made me cruel, and finding it useless to attempt shaking the creature off, I pulled its wrist on to the broken pane and rubbed it to and fro till the blood ran down and soaked the bedclothes, almost maddening me with fear. "How can I said at length. "Let me go, if you want me to let you in." The fingers relaxed. I snatched mine through the hole, hurriedly piled the books up in a pyramid against it, and stopped my ears to exclude the lamentable prayer. "Begone," I shouted. "I'll never let you in, not if you beg for 20 years. It's 20 years! 20 years! I've been a waif for 20 years. There began a feeble scratching outside, and the pile of books moved as if thrust forward. I tried to jump up, but could not stir a limb, and so yelled aloud in a frenzy of fright. And that's when Heathcliff comes running into the room, shouting, "Kathy, come back, oh come, my Kathy." When Heathcliff first leaves, so Kathy ends up a ghost, 20 years, shut out in the cold, away, wanting to come in, but cannot. She'd made her choice. She disengaged. She pulled away. And she lives she lives her ghosthood waiting for Heathcliff. Page 85, right after Heathcliff has gone and it's clear that he's not coming back. It says, "However, Catherine would not be persuaded into tranquility. She kept wandering to and fro from the gate to the door in a state of agitation which permitted no repose, and at length took up a permanent situation on one side of the wall near the road where, heedless of my expostulations and the growing thunder and the great drops that began to splash around her, she remained, calling at intervals and then listening and then crying. She beat Hareton or any child at a good passionate fit of crying." So she waits outside in the cold. She actually gets pretty sick. She waits outside in the cold, calling for him, looking for him, waiting for him. But he doesn't come. She's separated from him. We'll see this again when we get to page 124, where she loses her mind. She's dying. She says she sees a mirror and she sees herself in the mirror and she doesn't recognize herself. She doesn't know who she is. We could psychoanalyze this.
What is I, you, me, identity, persona? When you think of yourself, do you think of yourself as a whole, unified person? I think, therefore I am. Jacques Lacan, the most important psychoanalyst since Freud, theorized in 1936 that what we think of as our own identity is actually imaginary, a construct behind which the real subject resides. Lacan called the development of this identity the mirror stage. He posited that the first time an infant sees itself in the mirror, literally or figuratively, is the moment that the child develops a sense of the self, the I, or the individual identity. Before this, the child doesn't think of himself as an individual at all, but simply exists as a unified subject, indefinable and whole, at one with everything else around them. In this sense, the authenticity and reality of being a whole subject is lost when the child first understands itself as having an identity. This is what causes the split between what Freud called the id, or the unconscious self, the subject, and the ego, the formation of a self that we think of as an I. In doing this, the I becomes another. The ego becomes something altogether apart from the authentic and whole subject that the child experienced before. This new idea of ourselves is developed through the use of language, but Lacan insists that it means that we are detached and largely oblivious to our real selves, our own subject. When infants start to develop this new identity, the ego can be ordered in a way that helps the person make sense of themselves and can protect them against the inconsistencies and raw desires that the internal subject, unconscious or id, experiences. This dual relationship between the subject as a whole and what the child learns to perceive as an identity is a relationship between the imaginary and the real.
I am.
She sees the mirror and she sees herself in the mirror, but she doesn't realize it's her. She's losing her mind. She is losing her mind. She's scared of the mirror. She's scared of her own reflection in the mirror. And she says, Ellen says, what is the matter? Who is a coward now? Wake up. That is the glass, the mirror, Mrs. Linton. And you see yourself in it. And there I am too by your side. She doesn't recognize herself anymore because she's not herself anymore because she betrayed herself in marrying Edgar. Trembling and bewildered, she held me fast, but the horror gradually passed from her countenance. Its paleness gave place into a glow of shame. Oh dear, I thought I was at home, she sighed. I thought I was lying in my chamber at Wuthering Heights. Because I'm weak, my brain got confused and I screamed unconsciously. Don't say anything, but stay with me. I dread sleeping. My dreams appall me. Oh, if I were but in my own bed in the old house, she went on bitterly, wringing her hands, and that wind sounding in the firs by the lattice. Do you feel it? It comes straight down the moor. Do let me have one breath. To pacify her, I held the casement ajar a few seconds. A cold blast rushed through. I closed it and returned to my post. How long is it since I shut myself in here? She asked. It was Monday evening. This is Thursday night. What? The same week? Only that brief time? And then we're going to get into the sevens, but we'll come back to this point. She's a ghost that comes to the window because she's a girl that waited in the wind, and she's a woman that longed in the wind, and she's a ghost that comes with the wind. So Heathcliff returns. He hangs out outside her house, waiting to be noticed. Ellen notices him. He says, I have waited her an hour while I continued staring, and the whole of that time all around has been as still as death. I dared not enter. You do not know me? Look, I'm not a stranger. So he's come home, and when Ellen tells Kathy that he's there, she says that I'm afraid the joy is too great to be real. And her husband is upset. He says, the sight of you welcoming a runaway servant as a brother is disgusting. He knows she's not welcoming him as a brother. Not even close to a brother. And when Heathcliff is brought into the room, he says, Mrs. Linton, recalling old times, trying to set it like this is now, that was then, would have me give you a cordial reception. So I don't want to give you a cordial reception, but because my wife has this nostalgia for you, I will. And of course, I am gratified when anything occurs to please her. So I'll give her what she wants. I'm happy when anything makes her happy. And Heathcliff responds, and I also, especially if it be anything in which I have a part. I shall stay an hour or two willingly. So he's like, oh, this is now and that was then. Let me enter into the now, and also let me be the one to make her happy. I will be the one to make her happy, and I am here now. Ooh. They were too much absorbed in their mutual joy. This is Cathy and Heathcliff in their reunion. They were too much absorbed in their mutual joy to suffer embarrassment. Not so Mr. Edgar. He grew pale with pure annoyance, a feeling that reached its climax when his lady rose and, stepping across the rug, seized Heathcliff's hands again and laughed like one beside herself. I shall think it a dream tomorrow, she cried. I shall not be able to believe that I have seen and touched and spoken to you once more. And yet, cruel Heathcliff, you don't deserve this welcome, to be absent and silent for 3 years and never to think of me. His response is the same refrain he has had from the very beginning. Only for you, all for you, everything for you, always for you. A little more than you have thought of me, he murmured. I heard of your marriage, Cathy, not long since, and while waiting in the yard below, I meditated this plan, just to have one glimpse of your face, a stare of surprise, perhaps, and pretended pleasure. Afterwards, settle my score with Hindley, and then prevent the law by doing execution on myself. So I was going to look at you one last time. I was going to take revenge on Hindley. I was going to kill him. And then I was going to kill myself. Your welcome has put these ideas out of my mind. You want me. I know you do. And I'm here for it. But beware of meeting me with another aspect next time. Nay, you'll not drive me off again. You were really sorry for me, were you? Well, there was cause. I have fought through a bitter life since I last heard your voice, and you must forgive me, for I struggled only for you. You're welcome, seeing you, hearing you, feeling your hands on my hands, knowing that you missed me, that you thought of me, that you longed for me. I can't follow through on my plan. I came back to see you once, to kill your brother and kill myself. But now I see you again. I hear you again. I feel you again. I want you again. Everything I have done for the last 3 years has been for you. I heard you married Edgar, and I came back to take care of the last bit of my vengeance and to remove myself from the equation completely. Because I've been part of this equation always. And when I heard you married Edgar, I realized maybe I was not part of your equation. But now I see I am. And we're going to make it right. In order to make Cathy and Heathcliff right, everything else must be made wrong. And we don't like that as readers. That's not romantic as readers. No, Heathcliff's going to make it right. He's going to try anyway. Because every hardship he's gone through for the last 3 years to build himself up into something that is himself but would be acceptable to her as well, Everything he was doing for her. He found out she got married and he was going to end it all, but he realized that no, everything could still be for her. Everything. Always. Only for her. She makes me so mad. Okay, so he goes and he does have some revenge on Henley, but it's a slow burn revenge. And he does kind of love Hareton, Henley's son, who he actually saves from death accidentally at some point early on. Like, he catches him when Henley drops him off a staircase. He does have some care and love for Hareton. It's twisted. Remember? The wind grows things twisted, and Hareton doesn't have a mother, and the closest thing he has is Ellen, and then she gets removed from him. The kid has nothing, and the kid is rough and tumble and cruel. He's all the things that Heathcliff wishes he had been from the beginning and didn't have to become, because it would have been safer emotionally. Heathcliff is a little cream puff inside. He is a cream puff inside. He has become what he must become because of Cathy, in response to Cathy. Heathcliff affirms his principal reason for resuming a connection with his ancient persecutor is a wish to install himself in quarters at walking distance from the Grange, and an attachment to the house where we live together, and likewise a hope that I shall have more opportunities of seeing him there than I could have if he settled in Gimmerton. So, he's changing his story. He's telling Cathy that, and probably his story does change. He's still going to get revenge on Henley, but also if he's living with Henley, if he's living at the Heights, then there's more reason for Cathy to visit him, for them to see each other. Isabella, Edgar's sister, falls in love with him. And this makes Cathy very angry, very upset. But she's like, I wouldn't let you fall in love with him, my sister-in-law, because he's too wild, he's too crazy, he's too cruel. He hasn't really done anything wild, crazy, or cruel. He is slowly gambling Wuthering Heights away from his arch nemesis, Cathy's brother. But he really hasn't done anything cruel at this point. He is creating a wedge between Cathy and her husband, but Cathy is willingly helping him push that wedge in. And Isabella falls in love with him kind of the same way that Edgar fell in love with Cathy, because he's so different, he's so dark, he's so dangerous, he's so mysterious. And Cathy's response to that to Isabella is, well, I'd never let you fall in love with him, he's wild. But in reality, she wants both of them. She wants Edgar. She wants the life she has with Edgar. And she wants Heathcliff. She wants the connection and the passion and the truth that she has with Heathcliff. She wants her cake and she wants to eat it too. Who doesn't want their cake and to eat it too? That's such a weird phrase. But she does. She is Heathcliff. I am Heathcliff. That's my favorite line. I am Heathcliff. And Heathcliff is pretty clear. He's like, I'm not interested in Isabella. I want you. I'm not interested in Isabella. Cathy says to Heathcliff, I like her, speaking of Isabella, I like her too well, my dear Heathcliff, to let you absolutely seize and devour her up. So just kind of like testing the waters. Do you want her? Do you like her? Are you attracted to her? And he says very quickly, and I like her too ill. I'm not interested in her at all. I don't think about her to attempt it, except in a very ghoulish fashion. You'd hear of odd things if I lived alone with that mawkish waxen face. The most ordinary would be painting on its white the colors of the rainbow and turning the blue eyes black every day or two. They detestably resemble Linton's, so I'd beat her. If I married her, I'd beat her. Delectably, observes Catherine. They are a dove's eyes, an angel's. She's her brother's heir, is she not? He asked after a brief silence. So now He's thinking, wait, there might actually be good in her crush on me, because if I married her, then I could also take over Kathy's house. I could own Kathy's house and Kathy's old house, and then Kathy would be inextricably linked to me forever through legal means. If they were mine, they would be nonetheless that. So Kathy says, I should be sorry. Okay. She's her brother's heir, is she not? I have to go back. She's her brother's heir, is she not? He asked after a brief silence. I should be sorry to think so, returned his companion. Half a dozen nephews shall erase her title, please heaven. Abstract your mind from the subject at present. You are too prone to covet your neighbor's goods. Remember, this neighbor's goods are mine. And they would be none, if they were mine, says Heathcliff, they would be none the less that. So remember, I would never want what Kathy wants. I would never take from Kathy what Kathy desires. He knows she wants that life. He knows she wants that house. He knows Isabella will inherit it. Kathy's like, I see where you're going with this. Don't you dare marry that girl. Don't you dare marry that girl. And he's like, but if I marry that girl, then your house becomes my house. And it is no less your house for being my house. And then he tries to put her at ease by saying, she's not stupid, this girl. She won't marry me. She won't marry me. But you know what's going to happen. Heathcliff starts to get a little bit bummed out that Kathy isn't leaving Edgar, that she's really siding with Edgar a lot of the time because she's trying to protect that relationship, because she wants both. She kind of wants Heathcliff upset all the time. She manipulates him. She uses him. She pulls on his emotions so that she can feel something. It's sick. It's really messed up. And he gets tired of it. But he starts to think that maybe he should marry Isabella to give Kathy a taste of her own medicine, a little bit of jealousy. And when he starts to speak that way, Kathy devises a plan to break their hearts, to break Edgar's heart because he's not being compliant to her wishes and her whims, and Heathcliff's heart because he's not being compliant to her wishes and her whims, by breaking her own heart. And it is at this point that she stops eating. We don't know until after she's dead, but she's also pregnant. So she has stopped eating. She loses it. She starts to go crazy. Remember that in order to love, Heathcliff has to have a heart. He has to have a heart, and he does have a heart. And she knows it. And she decides she'll break both men's hearts by removing herself from the equation. She starves herself to death. And she does it feeling sorry for herself the whole time. So, chapter 12. I will die, she exclaimed, since no one cares anything about me. I wish I had not taken that. She just ate. I wish I had not eaten. No, I will die. He'd be glad. He does not love me at all. He would never miss me. As soon as I learn how he feels, I will choose between these two, either to starve at once, that would be no punishment unless he had a heart, or to recover and leave the country. Are you speaking the truth about him now? Take care. Is he actually so utterly indifferent to my life? So she's talking about Edgar. And Edgar knows that she hasn't shown her face for a while, knows she's hiding up in her room, doesn't check on her. And yeah, he's kind of letting her die. If I were only sure it would kill him, I would kill myself directly, says Kathy. She's losing it. She's going crazy. And on page 125, she kind of has a fit. She falls down. She bumps her head on the table leg. She says, I thought as I lay there with my head against the table leg and my eyes dimly discerning the gray square of the window, that I was enclosed in the oak-paneled bed at home. And my heart ached with some great grief, which just waking I could not recollect. I pondered and worried myself to discover what it could be, and most strangely, the whole last 7 years of my life grew a blank. I did not recall that they had been at all. I was a child, my father was just buried, and my misery arose from the separation that Hindley had ordered between me and Heathcliff. I was laid alone for the first time, and rousing from a dismal doze after a night of weeping, I lifted my hand to push the panels aside. It struck the tabletop. I swept it along the carpet, and then memory bust in. My late anguish was swallowed in a paroxysm of despair. I cannot say why I felt so wildly wretched. It must have been temporary derangement, for there is scarcely cause, but supposing at 12 years old, I had been wrenched from the heights and every early association and my all in all, as Heathcliff was at that time, and been converted at a stroke into Mrs. Linton, the lady of Thrushcross Grange, and the wife of a stranger, an exile, and outcast, thenceforth from what had been my world. You may fancy a glimpse of the abyss where I grovelled. Shake your head as you will, Nelly, you have helped to unsettle me. You should have spoken to Edgar, indeed you should, and compelled him to leave me quiet. Oh, my burning, I wish I were out of doors. I wish I were a little girl again, half savage and hardy and free and laughing at injuries, not maddening under them. Why am I so changed? Why does my blood rush into a hell of tumult at a few words? I'm sure I should be myself were I once among the heather on those hills. Open the windows again wide, fasten, open. I'm not helpless. I'll open it myself. Look. Okay, so then she has this moment where it's kind of telepathy. It's telepathy. She has a telepathic moment. She has a vision. She has an otherworldly sense, and she has a telepathic moment between her and Heathcliff. She says, look, that's my room with the candle in it and the trees swaying before it, and the other candle is in Joseph's garret. Joseph sits up late, doesn't he? He's waiting till I come home that he may lock the gate. Well, he'll wait a while yet. It's a rough journey and a sad heart to travel it, and we must pass by Gimmerton Kirk to go on that journey. Now, this is all been foreshadowed. This has all been foreshadowed in the beginning of the book. All of this is relating to the ghost and the journey to get to Heathcliff and those 20 years that are going to pass between her death and their reunion. Yes, there's a reunion. We've braved its ghosts often together and dared each other to stand among the graves and ask them to come. But Heathcliff, if I dare you now, will you venture? Heathcliff, if I dare you now, will you venture? She's alone and dying in her room with Nellie. If I dare you now, will you venture? If you do, I will keep you. I'll not lie there by myself. They may bury me 12 feet deep and throw the church down over me, but I won't rest till you are with me. I never will. She paused and resumed with a strange smile. He is considering. He would rather I come to him. Find a way then, not through that kirkyard. You are slow. Be content. You always followed me. So she's having a telepathic communication. She's like, will you come with me? And he's like, no, you come to me. And she's like, no. You always came after me. Come after me. Chase me. Find me. I will not rest until you do. I am Heathcliff, his soul and mine are the same. So she continues to grow ill. She gets a little bit stronger. Heathcliff marries Isabella. All sorts of stuff happen. That's a video in and of itself. He fights his way back to see Catherine before she dies. He's got to see her before she dies. So he actually kind of tries to hold Ellen hostage in Wuthering Heights until she promises to make a way for him to see her. He says, let us settle it at once. Will you stay here, and am I to fight my way to Catherine over Linton and his footmen, or will you be my friend as you have been hitherto and do what I request? Decide, because there is no reason for my lingering another minute if you persist in your stubborn ill nature. So either I'm going to go and fight my way observably through Linton, through all of his men, through all of his servants, and I'm going to get to her, or you're going to help me do it in a more reasonable manner. Which will it be? Because either way, I am going to get to Kathy. They're reunited. Nellie lets him in. He rushes to her side. Oh, Kathy. Oh, my life. How can I bear it? Was the first sentence he uttered in a tone that did not seek to disguise his despair. What now? Says Kathy. You've killed me. You've killed me? No. I wish I could hold you, she continued bitterly, till we were both dead. I shouldn't care what you suffered. I care nothing for your suffering. Why shouldn't you suffer? I suffer. Will you forget me? Will you be happy when I am in the earth? Will you say 20 years hence, that's the grave of Catherine Earnshaw? I loved her long ago and was wretched to lose her, but it is past. I've loved many others since. My children are dearer to me than she was, and at death I shall not rejoice that I am going to her. I shall be sorry that I must leave them. Will you say so, Heathcliff? Well, 20 years hence, he's literally going to go follow her ghost to the churchyard and dig up her grave and throw himself upon it 20 years in the ground and go be a ghost with her on the moors. Don't torture me till I am as mad as yourself, cried he, wrenching his head free and grinding his teeth. Well might Catherine deem that heaven would be a land of exile to her, unless with mortal body she cast away her mortal character also. Are you possessed with a devil, he said, to talk in that manner to me when you are dying? Do you reflect that all of those words will be branded in my memory and eating deeper eternally after you have left me? You know you lie to say that I have killed you, and Catherine, you know that I could as soon forget you as my own existence. It is not sufficient for your infernal selfishness that while you are at peace I shall writhe in the torments of hell. I am not wishing you greater torment than I have, Heathcliff. I only wish us never to be parted, and should a word of mine distress you hereafter, think I feel the same distress underground, and for my own sake forgive me. Come here and kneel down again. You never harmed me in your life. Nay, if you nurse anger, that will be worse to remember than my harsh words. Won't you come here again? Do. That is not my Heathcliff. I shall love my Heathcliff and take him with me. He is in my soul. The thing that irks me most is this shattered prison after all. I'm tired of being enclosed here. I'm weary to escape into that glorious world and to be always there, not seeing it dimly through tears and yearning for it through the walls of an aching heart, but really with it and in it. Nellie, you think you are better and more fortunate than I, in full health and strength. You are sorry for me. Very soon that will be altered. I shall be sorry for you. I shall be incomparably beyond and above you all. I wonder he won't be near me. She went on to herself. I thought he wished it. Heathcliff, dear, you should not be sullen now. Do come to me, Heathcliff. It is hard to forgive, says Heathcliff, and look at those eyes and feel those wasted hands. Kiss me again, and don't let me see your eyes. I forgive what you have done to me. I love my murderer, but yours? How can I? 70 times 7, forgiveness. Completion, wholeness. Yes, she's dead. How did she die? Quietly as a lamb. Did she mention me? Her life closed in a gentle dream. May she wake in torment. Page 174. He's not a human being. He had no claim on my charity. I gave him my heart, and he took and pinched it to death, and flung it back to me. People feel with their hearts, Ellen, and since he has destroyed mine, I have not power to feel for him, and I would not, though he groaned from his dying day, and wept tears of blood for Catherine. No, indeed, I wouldn't. And here Isabella began to cry, but immediately dashing the water from her lashes, she recommenced. You have to have a heart to feel. We've been establishing, not very clearly, I'll admit, because I kind of have too many things that I'm tracking here. But Heathcliff's heart keeps getting mentioned. Heathcliff has a heart. Heathcliff has a heart. He's a cream puff, but he resents being married to Isabella. He hates being married to Isabella. He just wants the Grange. He just wants revenge on Edgar because he sees Edgar ultimately as the catalyst for Kathy's death. So he takes Isabella, he marries her. He never pretends like he's anything from the very beginning. In fact, the moment they're running away together, he strangles her dog. The dog lives, but he strangles her dog. And she still runs off with him. Interestingly, Isabella, again, a video unto itself, but interesting, Isabella is the only one in this book who tells any part of her own story. because we have a letter from Isabella about how she leaves with her son, how she gets away, and how Heathcliff lets her. Now that son will be born and come back and cause a whole nother generation of stuff. But we won't get into that. We won't get into that. We'll stop there, and maybe I'll do a part 2, because there's so much more to say. I didn't even get through all of the second half of the book, or even touch on the second half of the book, but Kathy has died now. We know that her ghost comes to haunt him. We know that he follows her ghost into the moor. We know that he digs up her body. We know that he loves her from beginning to end, and his love actually never alters or falters. And everything he does for her. Is it a story we want to emulate? No. But does he love her to a fault? Yes. Yes. Yes, he does. And this is a really long video, so I'll leave it there, and I'll probably do a part 2, but I don't know when. But I'll do a part 2 because there's so much to say. There's so much more to say. But this is why I see this as a love story, and this is why I love Heathcliff. And this is why I don't like Kathy. In the meantime, let's go read.